Youth, in its boundless optimism, often painted the world in vibrant hues, believing in the power of good to conquer all. It was a time when purpose felt like a clear path, and the grand narratives of heroism beckoned with irresistible allure. Yet, history, with its relentless march, often revealed a starker truth. Even the purest hope was fragile, a delicate flame against the encroaching shadow of brutal inevitability. The machine of war, once set in motion, devoured ideals as readily as it consumed lives, leaving behind a landscape scarred not just by craters, but by the indelible marks on the human soul. Marguerite Vallon stepped from the rattling, mud-splattered ambulance into the biting February air of 1916. The ground beneath her boots a treacherous mix of frozen earth and churned mud. The scent of damp soil and gunpowder smoke hung heavy, a suffocating blanket over Verdun. Distant, yet constant, the rumble of artillery fire vibrated through the very air, a muffled thunder that had become the grim heartbeat of the front. She watched as more wounded soldiers were carefully, if hastily, unloaded from other vehicles, their faces pale and caked with mud, some with eyes that held a vacant stare, a chilling preview of the horrors she was about to witness. The cold, sharp, and relentless pierced through her thin nurse's uniform, clinging to her skin with an unwelcome dampness. Her initial thoughts, though unspoken, were a testament to a profound, almost naive idealism. She had envisioned herself as a beacon of salvation, a healer who would give life back to men. A deep sense of patriotism had propelled her here, a fervent desire to serve France, to mend the broken, to be useful in a world tearing itself apart. She believed, with the unwavering conviction of the young, that her hands, though small, could somehow staunch the bleeding of a nation. The field hospital was a jarring introduction to the reality of her new purpose. It was a collection of makeshift tents, their canvas flapping weakly in the wind, clustered around a more substantial, though still precarious, underground structure, perhaps a repurposed fort or a deep dugout. The air inside was thick, a nauseating blend of fresh blood, stale pus, and the acrid sting of cheap disinfectant. The dim light, mostly from flickering oil lamps and the unstable glow of dynamos, cast long, dancing shadows that distorted the already grim scene. The constant low murmur of pain, punctuated by sharp coughs and the distant thud of shells, created a suffocating symphony of suffering. A tall, gaunt man with weary eyes and a perpetually stooped posture, Captain Armand Dubois, the chief medical officer, moved with a quiet, efficient exhaustion. He acknowledged Marguerite with a curt nod, his voice, though low, carrying the weight of countless difficult decisions as he instructed her to assist Nurse Colette Moreau. Colette, a woman with broad shoulders and a gaze that seemed to have seen every shade of human misery, offered a brief, almost imperceptible smirk. She told Marguerite, her voice raspy from years of shouting orders and whispering comforts, that idealism was a luxury they couldn't afford here, and that she would soon learn the true nature of their work. Colette's cynicism, Marguerite sensed, was a hardened shield, a stark contrast to her own fragile hope. The moment of truth arrived swiftly, brutally. A young soldier, barely older than a boy, was brought in, his chest a mangled ruin. Marguerite, her hands trembling from both cold and a burgeoning fear, worked frantically, her movements clumsy in her inexperience. She tried to staunch the flow of blood, her breath catching in her throat with each desperate, shallow gasp the boy took. She had believed, truly believed she could save him, but the metallic tang of fresh blood filled her nostrils, and the sight of his face, so young and innocent, slowly draining of life, etched itself into her memory. She heard his last, ragged breath, a sound that seemed to echo the finality of all things. In that agonizing moment, a chilling realization settled deep within her. Her function, more often than not, was not to give life back, but merely to offer comfort before death arrived. The innocence she had carried to Verdun shattered, leaving behind a raw, visceral understanding of the hell she had entered. The days blurred into a relentless cycle of exhaustion, each one a grim echo of the last. Marguerite's hands, once soft and accustomed to the delicate touch of embroidery, now trembled not just from the biting cold, but from a pervasive, bone-deep fear. They were perpetually wet, slick with the metallic tang of blood, the viscous stickiness of pus, and the harsh, stinging bite of cheap disinfectant. The unbearable stench of gangrene, mingled with the cloying sweetness of fresh blood and the ever-present antiseptic, clung to the very fabric of her uniform, seeping into her skin, a constant, nauseating companion. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the low, continuous murmur of muffled groans, punctuated by hacking coughs, and the distant but persistent roar of artillery, a sound that had become the grim, monotonous soundtrack to her existence. Wounded men arrived at an unending stream, carried on makeshift stretchers, their bodies caked in mud and blood, some with wounds so horrific they defied comprehension. Amidst this relentless tide of suffering, Marguerite clung to the small, fragile acts of humanity that offered fleeting moments of purpose. She would sit by the cots, her voice soft, as she penned small letters for dying soldiers to their mothers and wives, trying to transform pain into soft words. Each carefully chosen phrase was an attempt to imbue dignity into the inevitable, to bridge the chasm between the dying and the world they were about to leave behind. She would hold their hands, feeling the rough texture of their calloused skin, the feverish heat, the desperate, fleeting pressure of their fingers. In these brief, intimate connections, she felt a flicker of her initial idealism, a sense that she was, in some small way, giving life back, even if only in the form of a final, comforting touch. But the respite was always fleeting. Night after night, the faces of the soldiers she couldn't save returned to her, not in flesh, but in vivid, tormenting nightmares. Sleep offered no escape, only a cruel repetition of the day's horrors. The exhaustion of battle, both physical and psychological, began to take its toll, manifesting in a pervasive sense of dread that clung to her even in waking hours. The most terrifying realization, however, was the insidious creep of depersonalization. She began to recognize, in the vacant, distant eyes of the dying, the very same look she saw reflected in her own mirror. It was a chilling moment of self-recognition, a stark realization that the war was slowly, relentlessly corroding her own soul, threatening to transform her into just another silent victim. She fought a desperate internal battle against insensitivity, a profound fear of becoming merely a machine for dressings and bandages, devoid of emotion. Her empathy, once her greatest strength, was now a heavy burden, making her susceptible to absorbing the pain of every soul she encountered. One evening, a young soldier, Private Jean-Pierre Lefebvre, barely 19, frail and visibly terrified, was brought in. He was a recurring patient, his body relatively unharmed, but his eyes wide with an unseen horror, his limbs trembling uncontrollably, clear signs of incipient shell shock. Marguerite tried to offer comfort, her voice gentle as she spoke to him, but she felt a profound helplessness in the face of his invisible trauma. Later, Private Amadou Diallo, a Senegalese tirailleur of 22, was admitted. He was a quiet, resilient man, his dark eyes holding a deep stillness that hinted at profound suffering. a suffering compounded by the complexities of his identity in a European conflict. Marguerite observed him, sensing a quiet dignity that contrasted sharply with the chaos around them. As night deepened, a new, more ominous sound began to permeate the air. The distant rumble of artillery, a constant companion, intensified, growing closer, louder, transforming into a deafening roar that shook the very ground beneath the hospital tents. The canvas walls flapped violently, and the flickering oil lamps swayed precariously. The smell of burnt gunpowder began to mix with the ever-present disinfectant, creating an oppressive, suffocating atmosphere. Marguerite and Colette worked under the flickering, uncertain light, their nerves frayed, but their movements precise, maintaining a grim composure amidst the escalating bombardment. The air crackled with an unspoken tension, a prelude to the storm that was surely coming. Red, leaving behind a raw, visceral understanding of the hell she had entered. The distant rumble that had become the constant backdrop to their lives now transformed into a deafening, incessant roar. The German offensive was no longer a distant threat, it was a rapidly approaching storm. The ground beneath Marguerite's feet began to tremble violently, a continuous tremor that vibrated through her bones. The night sky, once a canvas for the flickering oil lamps, was now illuminated by blinding flashes of explosions, each one tearing a momentary hole in the darkness. Dust and debris, fine and gritty, began to rain down on the flimsy hospital tents, a chilling indication of the danger's proximity. The air grew thick, dense with the acrid smell of gunpowder and smoke, mingling with the familiar stench of blood and disinfectant. Wounded men arrived in a relentless, overwhelming tide, more than Marguerite had ever seen before. Their bodies were caked in thick, clinging mud and soaked with blood, some bearing horrific wounds that defied comprehension, grotesque mutilations from explosions and shrapnel. The hospital plunged into utter chaos. Marguerite and the rest of the team, already exhausted beyond measure, worked with a frantic, desperate speed. Their hands moved almost instinctively, a blur of motion as they struggled to staunch hemorrhages, clean gaping wounds, and administer sedatives to dull the agonizing pain. The air was filled with a cacophony of muffled groans, sharp cries of agony, and the urgent, clipped orders of the doctors, all blending into a terrifying symphony of suffering. The critical scarcity of supplies became painfully evident. Bandages, once plentiful, dwindled to mere scraps. The precious disinfectant, their only defense against rampant infection, was almost gone. Its sharp scent barely noticeable amidst the overwhelming odors of the wounded. The team was forced to improvise with whatever they could find, their ingenuity stretched to its breaking point. Marguerite witnessed Captain Dubois attempting to perform a basic amputation with instruments that seemed woefully inadequate, his movements precise but burdened by the immense difficulty of the task. A profound sense of helplessness washed over her, a chilling reminder of their limited power against such overwhelming destruction. A severely wounded man was brought in, his face pale and contorted in agony. It was Jean-Pierre Lefebvre, the young soldier whose eyes held the vacant stare of shell shock. This time, his physical wounds were grave, a deep gash across his side that bled profusely. Captain Dubois, his face etched with a new layer of exhaustion, made a difficult and rapid medical decision. Marguerite watched, her heart pounding, as the captain's voice, though low, conveyed the immense gravity of the situation, explaining that Jean-Pierre's life hung by a thread, and that a drastic measure was their only hope. She could almost feel the agony of his choice, the weight of a life balanced precariously on his surgical blade. Then, Amidst the relentless flow of French casualties, a new arrival. Private Ernst Müller, a German prisoner, was carried in, his arm shattered, his face pale and streaked with dirt. He was the enemy, yet in that moment he was simply another man, suffering. His eyes holding the same desperate, haunted look Marguerite had come to know so intimately. For a brief, suspended moment, their gazes met. There was no hatred, no animosity, only a shared understanding of profound despair. The smell of sweat, blood, and fear, Marguerite realized, was identical on both sides of this brutal conflict. The universal suffering of war transcended all barriers, reducing them all to vulnerable, fragile beings caught in its merciless grip. The world exploded. The deafening roar of the artillery, which had been a constant, oppressive presence, now intensified into a singular, cataclysmic blast that shook the very foundations of the earth. The impact was direct, a concussive force that ripped through the makeshift hospital. Shrapnel screamed through the air, tearing canvas tents, splintering wooden supports, and sending debris raining down. The air became a suffocating cloud of dust, smoke, and the acrid, metallic scent of freshly detonated explosives. The cold and dampness of the underground shelter mixed with the sudden searing heat of nearby flames and the sickening smell of burnt flesh. More wounded men, some already injured, now bore fresh, grievous wounds from the blast, their cries adding to the terrifying symphony of chaos. Amidst the pandemonium, Captain Dubois' voice, strained but resolute, cut through the din. He announced the evacuation order, his words heavy with the grim reality that not all the wounded could be moved in time. Marguerite's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. She was confronted with the central, agonizing decision of her time at Verdun: to flee, to save herself from the encroaching inferno, or to remain amidst the helpless, protecting them until her last breath. Her personal fears, the primal instinct for survival, warred fiercely with her profound sense of duty, the silent promise she had made to these men. The torment of the choice was a physical ache in her chest. Marguerite did not hesitate for long. A quiet resolve settled over her, hardening her gaze. She would stay. With Colette at her side, their movements synchronized by shared purpose, and Captain Dubois directing their desperate efforts, they fought to keep the wounded safe. They improvised shelters from what little remained, dragging stretchers to the most protected corners of the shattered underground space, using their own bodies as shields to protect the most vulnerable patients. The cold, slimy feel of mud and the slickness of blood on her hands were constant companions as she strained against the inert weight of bodies, her muscles screaming in protest. Each breath was a struggle, each movement a testament to a courage she hadn't known she possessed. Then a small, terrified figure emerged from the swirling dust. It was little Elise, the 8-year-old orphan, her eyes wide with fear, seeking refuge in the only place she knew. Her small, trembling presence was a stark reminder of the innocent life that still existed, a fragile flicker that needed protection. The sight of Elise, frightened but clinging to a desperate hope, solidified Marguerite's resolve, transforming her duty into an unwavering determination. The team worked under a relentless barrage of enemy fire. They faced the unseen enemy not with rifles, but with needles, bandages, and an unyielding will. Every moment was a risk of death, the air thick with the whistle of bullets and the concussive force of explosions. Marguerite moved with a desperate urgency, her breath ragged, cold sweat trickling down her temples. She felt the physical and emotional toll of the struggle, a profound exhaustion that seeped into her very bones. The offensive eventually subsided, the deafening roar fading into a terrifying, ringing silence. But not without losses. Some patients, those too gravely wounded or too exposed, did not survive the direct impact or the aggravated injuries. The survival of the others was precarious, a fragile victory. Marguerite stood amidst the wreckage, her body trembling, her eyes red-rimmed and burning. Her decision to stay had saved lives, but at an immense personal cost. Yet, in the profound exhaustion, a new understanding of her purpose began to emerge, a quiet certainty forged in the crucible of Verdun. An eerie silence descended, almost more oppressive than the deafening roar that had preceded it. The world, moments ago a maelstrom of sound and fury, now lay hushed, save for the distant, mournful cries of the wounded and the soft drip of water from shattered pipes. The sight of the devastation was absolute. The hospital, once a fragile sanctuary, lay in ruins, its canvas torn, its wooden beams splintered. The landscape beyond was unrecognizable, a lunar expanse of freshly churned earth and smoking craters, a testament to the sheer unbridled force of the bombardment. Yet amidst this profound destruction, there was also the quiet, stubborn sight of resilience, of survivors clinging to life, their forms huddled together, a fragile testament to endurance. The acrid smell of death and gunpowder still lingered, but now, faintly, a fresh, clean scent of rain began to permeate the air, as if the heavens themselves sought to wash away the blood and grime, bringing with it a subtle, almost imperceptible scent of hope. The biting cold and dampness still clung to Margaret's skin, but a profound sense of relief, a fragile calm, settled over her. The arrival of reinforcements, heralded by the distant rumble of trucks and the shouts of new voices, confirmed the end of the immediate offensive. It brought a temporary reprieve, a moment to breathe. The grim process of counting the dead and assessing the wounded began, a painful but necessary ritual. Marguerite, exhausted to her very core, her eyes red-rimmed and burning, her body trembling with residual adrenaline and fatigue, felt a new, profound understanding of her purpose. She had not given life back in the sense of preventing death, but she had offered dignity, comfort, and in her unwavering decision to stay, she had directly saved lives. A quiet certainty, forged in the crucible of that night, settled within her. Captain Dubois, his face still etched with the lines of exhaustion, moved with a renewed, if weary, pragmatism. He looked at Marguerite, a silent acknowledgment passing between them, a new respect in his gaze that transcended their professional roles. Colette, her cynical facade slightly cracked, offered Marguerite a rare, almost imperceptible nod of recognition, a silent testament to their shared ordeal and Marguerite's courage. Private Jean-Pierre, if he had survived the night, was likely transferred to a more stable facility, carrying with him the invisible scars of war, but perhaps also the faint, comforting memory of Marguerite's gentle touch. Private Amadou, if he had recovered from his wounds, would continue his quiet struggle, his stillness now understood by Marguerite as a profound shield against the madness. Even Private Ernst Müller, the German prisoner, might have offered a brief, fleeting moment of gratitude, a silent recognition of their shared humanity in the face of a common, brutal enemy. And little Elise, if rescued from the chaos, represented the innocence that war, despite its best efforts, could not entirely destroy. A fragile glimpse of a future still possible. The story of Verdun, Marguerite knew, would be etched into her soul, a landscape of craters and memories. The gaze of the dying in her mirror might never completely disappear, but now it also carried the quiet strength of her choice, the unwavering certainty that acts of humanity, however small, were the true heroism in a world consumed by collapse. Her life and the lives she had touched became a testament to the enduring truth. Even in hell, compassion and silent courage could flourish. These were the stories, she realized, that deserved to be remembered and told, not just for the fallen, but for the living, a profound connection to the resilience of the human spirit.